Hello there, net neighbor. I'm JP. I hope this video finds you well and is helpful to you, and thanks for joining me. This video is going to show how to make a line art image by hand tracing, which I call rotoscoping, though that term isn't exactly right. In Photoshop, I'm using Photoshop 6, a digital photograph of an object or person, or animal or something. This can be done in almost any photo editing or graphics application that uses layers and other somewhat advanced features, the most popular free one being GIMP. There are some really good videos on YouTube about converting photos to line art automatically, which I recommend you check out also. I'll link to some in the video description below. Also, I provided additional information on images for this type of tracing after the end of the video for the sake of thoroughness at this time. I want to give a thank you to Dawn of the Thread that visited my previous video about converting a line art picture to a scalable SVG vector graphic that suggested I do a tutorial on how to make the line art that I do to start with that they saw in my previous video. This is that tutorial, so thank you. But enough of that, let's get to it. The first thing you need to do is to know what photo you want to turn into hand-drawn line art, realizing that something with a lot of intricate detail, like embroidery, chainmail armor, flowers, and other patterns of multiple mass objects or details are extremely tedious to do. You need to either set your mind to really spending some time, or decide how you want to fudge or cheat your way out of having to do things like that. Usually by leaving such things with only slight hints of details, or changing them into something easier. A flowery Hawaiian shirt in a photo winds up being a plain white tee with a smiley face on it in your image, for example, and that's perfectly fine. It allows you to challenge of making artistic changes to things in photos to see how well you can do at adapting and improvising. There's another option which you can use, which is to use a common photo to line art method like I mentioned above, to automatically cartoonize such intricate detail or trouble areas while keeping your hand-traced line art portion also. But anyway, let's find a picture, shall we? Well, you're free to use whatever content you wish, from still life to people to animals, either other line art or paintings. What you want to keep in mind is the picture's resolution and actual size in dimensions, in pixels. Most pictures on the internet are about 72 dots per inch, or more accurately pixels per inch. That's the standard for screen viewing for the internet, and just normal screen viewing, and is fine if your image is going to be for web only. This keeps the file size very small, but at the expense of a loss of any finer detail. I'd recommend anything you do be at least a resolution of 150 pixels if you're not sure if you want it to be a little more high quality. 72 is okay if you just really only want it for the web, but 300 is the best for any really nice pictures that may need to be printed at some point. It's high quality. That's the print minimum. You want the highest resolution image that you can get and the largest dimension size image you can get that you'll be tracing. If you use images smaller than about 1200 pixels on one side, the quality is likely to be poor, and the details and lines that make up contours and shapes are likely to be very blurry, which will really challenge your creativity and spatial logic when tracing. So go 1500 at least, 1200 at the very minimum. I recommend 2000 to 4000 pixel images if at all possible. Regardless, we're going to be tracing the image and creating a 300 pixel resolution 2000 or larger pixel dimension image, regardless of the base image's starting specifics. So you want to start with a large picture if you can, 15 to 2000 pixels, 1500 to 2000 pixels. The resolution, the better you can start with, the better it's going to be, because there's more detail that you'll be able to make out more easily. Low detail images, low resolution images are going to be blurry, even if they're really big images, so keep that in mind. For this video, I found a picture of Angelina Jolie. Its dimensions are 1400 by 1752 pixels per inch, which isn't too bad, and its colors and the subject's placement and size within the photo are acceptable. So let's right-click to bring up the Windows context menu and select Open With and Adobe Photoshop. I'm still using Windows XP here, I know. Once the picture loads up, I like to go to the menu bar at the top of the screen and choose Image, Auto Tone, which usually lightens up the midtones and highlights of an image. Sometimes I mess with the other auto features, but they didn't improve anything when I tried this earlier, so I'm not going to do anything here. Next, again, from the menu bar, choose Image Size. A dialog opens up that tells you the dimensions and resolution of your image. The picture is a typical web image, so its resolution is 72 pixels per inch, lowest you can get without really being ugly. As I said, this video is focusing on 300 ppi, so I'm going to change this to 300, and which then changes the pixel dimensions and document size in inches. 7300 is way too big, way bigger than I want. Well, I'd love to use images that big, even if I don't need them, but they make for a very large file size, and I have an old computer that lags horribly over about 3000 pixels. I work in 4000 and it's hard to do. Sometimes it just lags beyond use. So I go back up and I change the largest number to 3000. And I hit OK and zoom in with Control and the plus key a few times to get a good view of the main portion where I'm going to start, which is the face. Always create a duplicate of your background image layer. The image that loads up is called the background image. Press Ctrl J to do so. That will duplicate the layer that's currently selected. Now click on the eye on the background layer to hide it. You shouldn't need it again, but if you do, it'll be there. Notice it has a lock on it, so you can't affect it. You can't modify it or draw on it or anything like that. And you want to keep it that way. But hopefully we'll never see this image again. We won't need to use this. Your base image is now the one titled Layer 1 that appeared above your background image whenever you duplicated it. Click the word Layer 1, which allows you to edit the name, and rename it to Base, and press Enter. This is now going to be your base image. Images may be made a bit less busy and allow you to see your line art better if you reduce the opacity of the base image, making them a bit see-through. I set mine usually to about 95%. It depends on the contrast and darkness of the image. I don't want to lose detail that I'm going to need to trace over, but I don't want it too dark. Next, hit Shift-Control-N to create a new blank layer on top of your base layer, the one that's selected. Name it Line Art or B&W or whatever fits. This will be your main black and white only line art layer. Make sure the base layer is selected and then go up into the layers box and click the lock icon to lock the base layer, the one below the new line art layer. To make sure you won't accidentally draw or modify on this layer either. You want to be working on a new layer. You don't want to be working on your base layer. You want to be working on the line art layer. So make sure it's selected. We'll actually only be using a couple of Photoshop's tools for most everything we're doing. The main ones being the pencil, pen, maybe eraser, obviously. Oh, I assume you know how to use most of these to some extent, as well as the selection tool. It can come in handy. You might need it. But anyway, first, click the pencil icon in your tool strip, and if it isn't open already, open your Brush Presets dialog, or alternately change the size if you have the tool size in your top toolbar under your menu bar. Usually for images between 1500 and 4000 pixels, I use pencil sizes of 3 to 15, 5 and 10 being usually the most common. I'm going with 5. Check and see how its size compares to the image by making a quick stroke or two. So just run the pencil across the image a couple times, see what it looks like. A nice, bold black line, very clear over the slightly faded layer beneath it. Some people like to use different pencil colors like red to make their lines even more visible and stand out, so they can easily tell they're black from like shadows or black color in the picture. It's just a personal preference. I just go with black if the opacity of the layer below it's light enough. The line widths are a little wide for my taste using this 5-pixel brush, but we won't really be using it directly as it is, and more on that later, so I'm going to go with this. It should work out okay. And you may, and usually will, want to change line widths when you do more detailed inner things, like if you do the nose and the mouth and stuff, you'll usually want to use a smaller line width. Make sure your brush preset is for pencil. It's set to about 5 pixels. Uses a hard, crisp edge round brush, and that the opacity at the top is 100%, and the brush preset features are set to the following. Brush, a hard, crisp, round 5-pixel. Don't use one with the smudged edges. We don't want anything but either black or white. We don't want any sort of gray. No blurry brushes. Shape dynamics checked. Smoothing checked. Roundness 100%. Hardness 100%. Spacing checked. And usually anywhere around 20%, just not too far. If it goes up really high, it starts actually having spaces between parts of the line for some reason, so just keep it around 20%. But now that you've done all that, we're going to a different tool. We'll use the pencil tool directly in rare situations. So it's not going to be used that much. You'll only be using it to fill in things every now and then that you might notice. So click on the pen tool. A handful of icons down in your tool strip from the pencil tool. It looks like a calligraphy or old-timey fountain pen in Photoshop. In other graphics programs, the pen or line or curve or Bezier path, it'll have different names. We'll be starting a path first. Click anywhere where you want to start a line, and a small semi-transparent block will appear. This is a starting anchor point, sometimes called a node in other graphics programs, or just a point. Now find another place not too far away along the same contour you want to trace, and click and hold this time. So click first just to start it and let off the mouse. And then whenever you want to make your second point, click and hold it, and pull the mouse down and to the side as needed until the path or the curved line between the 2 points bends in the manner you want it and is superimposed over where you want the line drawn. Then release the mouse button. You started and made your first segment of a path now. From here, if you want, you can click and hold and drag on another, creating another third point, which will create a second line, this one between the second point and the new one. You can keep doing this until you've made a shape by coming back to your starting point, which makes the pen tool turn into a tiny circle icon when you hover over the original starting point. Clicking on that will close the path, and the next time you click somewhere with the pen tool, a new path will be started. When you create paths, arrows appear pointing outward from each node or anchor point. These are handles, which you can hold down Control and click to drag them. That will change the shape and manipulate the overall segment that those are a part of. If you made too long a path at some point, and you need it to bend in or out a little more, like if you drew a line over part of the face contour but need to deform it to the cheek shape, you can Control click on that segment and then right click with the mouse pointer hovering over that segment and choose Add Anchor Point from the context menu that pops up. This adds another node into the segment which you can use to drag things in and out and around and again, it deforms the shape and changes the path and the curve and everything. You may also decide not to close a path and make a shape, but to simply leave a path open and move on to creating other paths instead. You may do this while you're in a current path by holding down Control and clicking somewhere else. The previous path will deselect and that path will be finalized, and you will be free to start making a new path. You can also hit Escape to finalize a path instead of hitting Control and clicking somewhere else. If you finalized a path and now want to start another path from the starting point of that path or the end point. So if you finalized a path, went off, drew some more paths, and then thought, well, I want to connect these, you can go back to the first path and just click on either the beginning or the end node, and the manipulation handles will appear again. You can hold down the mouse button and drag and all that sort of thing. It basically lets you reconnect to your original paths. And as I said, if at any point you make a mistake, you can usually use Control-Z to undo things, but while making a path, you want to hit backspace to delete the last point made. This will let you go back one point at a time by hitting backspace. If you hit Control-Z while making a path, then it will delete the entire path that you've made. It'll just undo the entire thing, no matter how long it is. So you want to use backspace only if you want to just delete like the last point that you've added. Once you have a path that you want to turn into a drawn line, called adding a stroke to the path, make sure it's selected. Control click if it isn't your current one, and right click over it and select stroke path or subpath from the context menu that comes up. If a path is closed, it'll say stroke path. If the path is open, if it's one you just left open and finalized somewhere, it'll say stroke subpath. It doesn't matter, it's the same thing. This brings up a dialog box that has two elements, Tool and Simulate Pressure. You want Simulate Pressure checked if you want the line to begin and end with a thinner tapering point, like it looks artsy, or unchecked if you want the same line thickness for the whole path. Tool should be Pencil. It will use the settings you choose for the pencil tool earlier, including the foreground color, to draw the line. You want Pencil because it does not use anti-aliasing, which, as I said before, adds blur to soften the lines it draws. It's just a visual trick, and it actually adds extra colors. It adds various shades of gray besides your black and white, which causes problems because you only want black and white for your line art. You don't want extra colors on that layer. If you have a completed path that makes up a whole shape that you've closed, instead of choosing stroke path, you can do fill path, which colors the entire shape of the foreground color. So if you had maybe hair or an area of shadow or something like that, you could fill it and it would just automatically be all black if that was your foreground color. For the most part, these are the basics of the whole method for hand tracing an image in Photoshop 6 to create line art. I'll do some more tracing here to give you the idea of how things can turn out. The downside of tracing is that you still have to have at least a very basic eye or skill for art, and almost intuiting where some lines should or shouldn't go, like the shadows of the nose or lips, how many details are too many for the face. But I've seen people with no real artistic ability make some wonderful traces with practice, and you can too. From here you can further refine the line art by turning it into a scalable SVG vector image with vector programs like Adobe Illustrator or the free Inkscape application, which is what I use. You can also move on to coloring the image instead here or in another program, creating one or more new layers and using the pencil tool or filling areas with the paint tool and the select tool. And there's even more sophisticated things than that, adding more layers and using dodge and overlays and all kinds of things, but this is way beyond the scope of this. You can turn the colored images into SVGs also in Inkscape or Illustrator. As always, I welcome questions, comments, feedback, or any other thoughts all my net neighbors want to share. And speaking of sharing, if you find this video useful, a share, like, subscribe, or anything else would be most appreciated. Thank you for your time, and I hope this was helpful. Have a great day, net neighbor. And for those of you watching and wanting a bit extra image information, a little more in-depth, then just keep watching, because there's a little more coming right up. Alright, this is the additional info on images that may or may not be useful to some people, and you will need to consider it for tracing, so you might want to just go ahead and watch it. If you have plans for physical prints of any significant quality, if the image you're working on you're going to want to print out in some way on paper or whatever, and you want it to be a better quality than just a line. The thing is, a lot of things they'll be faded, or they'll have a lot of artifacts in them if they're low quality. So if you're going to print anything out, you want to go for 300 or even up to 600 pixel resolution, which that's print quality. 300 is minimum print quality, suitable for book covers or print-on-demand items like t-shirts or other cafe press type make-your-own custom logo items like book bags and coffee mugs and that sort of thing. A printable picture dimension size tends to be a minimum of 2,000 to 10,000 pixels on one side, or just whatever. Basically, multiply the picture's desired number of inches by 300. So if you wanted a 5 by 5 inch printable image, 300 times 5 equals 1500. So a 1500 by 1500 image is the pixel dimensions you want for the 5 by 5 inch. This means 2000 pixels is 6.67 inches. You should keep in mind the size of the subject you're going to be tracing within the picture. If you've got a 4000 pixel image, but the actual subject, say a swamp man, is way in the background and maybe out of focus, then that isn't going to do you any good. Your actual swamp man may be 800 by 200 pixels in size, no matter how big the picture is. So make sure when you see a 3000 pixel image of whatever your image is you want, you note the important dimensions, the subject's own true size within the larger image. Obviously, if you're tracing the whole image, this is moot. If it's like a garden or something and you're going to trace all of it, then obviously it's going to be the size of the image. And a last caution here, obviously, as I said earlier, beware of the content of the picture. If it's very dark or too bright and washed out or too blurry and low quality image, you're going to have trouble differentiating the lines to trace. Once you get used to it, this might not be such a problem, and you can use your own creative license to do the lines and pretty much draw whatever you want, like a real artist or cartoonist. You want a photo with clear, crisp, well-differentiated subject and good lighting and contrast. Though you can modify photos when you bring them into Photoshop, you can modify them to some minor extent, to make them easier to work with by changing tones and curves and levels and color dodging and things like that. But bad quality is just not going to be able to be improved. So keep that in mind. Make sure to get a good quality, crisp photo with good resolution, if at all possible, to do your tracing. Thank you.